All right, folks, we want to welcome everybody to our first Administrators Institute. We appreciate you being here with us. We know how precious your time is, especially during this time of the year. It's still a very, very busy time of the year. So we want to thank you again for your time to spend with us and dive in a little deeper in becoming familiar with not only the Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities, but also spending some time together and really thinking about your current practices and processes that impact all things, all systems regarding English learners and English learners with disabilities. So today, we want to be able to offer you all of those resources. We have a Padlet that you see on the screen right now. That's going to be made available to you throughout the entire series of these presentations. So feel free to access it now, as it contains the slide deck for today's presentation. And as we're going to introduce ourselves formally in just a sec, but in the meantime, we're going to ask that you please introduce yourselves to us and to the group by providing us with your name, the district or county office or SELPA that you're affiliated with, as well as your current position. Although this series of presentations is designed for administrators, we were asked, there was a couple questions about, can I bring my case manager? Can I bring, my speech pathologist? Absolutely. However, our focus is really to have you as administrators really think about those things that you have some control over, impact on, so that you're able to make the changes with the resources and well-informed information to help impact all our English learners and students with disabilities. So as you are doing that, we're going to formally introduce ourselves. Welcome on behalf of Imperial County SELPA and our project grant Improving Outcomes of English Learners with Disabilities. I want to welcome you. My name is Lupita Olguin-rubio. I am participating with this team, this amazing team of wonderful women who not only are passionate about this work, but have combined, we have different lenses that we bring to this work. My lens, my approach to this work, my contribution to this work is all things English learners, English language development, and literacy for multilingual learners. My background, I was raised in the curriculum department, where I was a curriculum coordinator supporting our local, regional, and state practitioners regarding English learners and English language development standards and Title III support. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues, Vanessa and Christina, to give you a little bit of background about themselves as well.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Vanessa Lopez, and I am a coordinator here at Imperial County SELPA. Prior to joining our SELPA 4 years ago, I was a classroom teacher in the quote-unquote RSPSDC settings for 18 years. I was also a resource teacher, an English language learner coach, and an instructional technology coach as well. Currently, I work with all things assistive technology, adapted physical education, and also this grant work, Improving Outcomes with English Learners with Disabilities. And just to give you a little bit of additional background, I too am the mother of an English learner, 2 English learners, but one of a student with a disability also. So again, bringing multiple perspectives is our superpower here at our team.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christina Zavala, and I, as Miss Debbie Montoya had shared, I'm actually new to the team. I recently just started this week as a new SELPA coordinator here in Imperial County, and my background is in the area of school psychology. I've been a school psychologist for the past 10 years, and recently had experience also as director of special education. So I'm really excited to be here and start working with the team on improving the outcomes of English language learners with disabilities. I also have some background in assistive technology as well. So I'm really thrilled to be here. So thank you.
Thank you, ladies, and we shall continue. Here we go. So as mentioned before, we were awarded this grant, Improving Outcomes for English Learners with Disabilities, and we're one of the SELPA Content Lead grants. And our focus is really to provide CDE assistance in the dissemination through professional development and technical assistance of the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. And in these last few years, we've been able to create different resources, different products, companion resources, if you will, to the Practitioner's Guide. And another focus of ours is to help build networks and capacity of all practitioners at all levels, county office level, LEA level, school site level. We've had the privilege of being able to work with different administrators and practitioners at all levels, and also to collaborate with other organizations like GABE and Californians Together. So we've been very privileged to be able to do this type of work. And as we move forward in offering these resources to you as administrators, we ask that you consider taking that charge and reach out to your counterparts. If you're a special ed administrator today, be thinking about who might you be able to reach out to and connect with in the general education department, in the English learner department, to help build stronger systems in support of our English learners and English learners with disabilities. So that is the ask that we have of you today moving forward. So why are we here? We're here because we know that English learners are a tremendous number or percentage of population of our students. Most of them, I think it's close to 70%, are at the elementary level and about 30% at the secondary level. But we also want to take note that about 30% of our students with disabilities are English learners as well. And so this resource, the Practitioner's Guide, along with other resources, are afforded to us to be able to guide, to inform our practices, to inform our scope of work, again, in support of multilingual learners and their unique needs as some of them, 30% of them, of our students identified as students with special needs are also English learners. So I'm going to give you just a quick walkthrough of the context that is leading up to the use and implementation of the Practitioner's Guide. So we're going to go way back in time to 2012, when the California English Language Development Standards were developed and were disseminated statewide. So the California English Language Development Standards are designed to guide practitioners in the design of comprehensive ELD instruction, addressing all 4 domains, and also aligned to the content standards: mathematics, language arts, history, physical education. So the approach in California in the dissemination and the design of the English language development standards is to create a companion to the content standards, whereas before they were separate and there was no connection at all in terms of the design. So in 2012, that was a big shift in a resource that was designed to support our English learners statewide. And moving forward in 2015, our state superintendent pushed out a letter informing all of our LEAs and superintendents in the state of California, reinforcing the policy of comprehensive ELD, that is designated and integrated ELD for all English learners, including English learners with disability. So it really put some emphasis on the implementation of comprehensive ELD, which is a service afforded to English learners in support of language acquisition. And I'm going to move forward to the next slide just to get us moving along. Through the year of 2015, we saw the dissemination of the California Dyslexia Guidelines, which was one of the first resources that really pushed a collaboration between general education and special education and parents in taking a closer look at dyslexia. Chapter 7 of this guide really takes a closer look at multilingual learners as it pertains to dyslexia. Vanessa and I had an opportunity to work with our local induction program in helping them take a closer look at this chapter. And again, our focus here is to be able to start building bridges between our silos, because we want to maintain the expertise that we have in our respective fields, but we also want to be able to start collaborating and therefore connecting our respective expertise in helping improve all systems. Moving forward to 2017, we saw the EL Roadmap, which is our new California state policy that is designed to help provide opportunities, resources, and ways to help, tools to help all levels of the educational system collaborate in support of our English learners throughout the state, which again includes English learners with disabilities. So again, moving forward, we're going to move straight to 2019, which brings us here today. In 2019, the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disability was disseminated through the California Department of Education. And again, as part of our work through this grant is to support the Department of Ed in disseminating and providing professional development around this resource. Which brings us to today, right? Today we are focusing on Chapter 1 of the Practitioner's Guide. Although this is our grounding resource for this series of professional development for you, we do want to let you know that it is compiled of different bodies of research with different experts in the field who came together to inform and write and design this resource. So although it is not a requirement, it is a very powerful and guidance document that we have been had the privilege to be able to push out through a professional development throughout these last few years. So this guide, the Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities, is formatted into 5 sections, as you can see here. Of these 5 sections, today we're going to focus on Chapter 1. And this is the organization of all of the chapters. Section 1 has 2 chapters. Again, we're going to focus on Chapter 1 today, which focuses solely on identifying English learners. Let me rephrase that. Students with disabilities who may be identified as English learners. And so because this is an administrator's training, we designed today's presentation to focus on the administrator questions that you see here. Each one of the chapters has a series of questions designed for a specific group. And so today we're going to focus on the 2 questions that you see highlighted here on this slide. But before we move forward, I'm going to hand it over for a little bit to Vanessa, who's going to walk us through one of the companion resources that I talked about earlier to many of the resources within the Practitioner's Guide. In this case, we have an infographic for Chapter 1 that Vanessa created. So I'm going to hand it over to her to walk us through the design and the content of the infographic, so that as we move forward through the presentation, you have this resource that you can refer to after our presentation today as a guide, and to help you, again, dive deeper into the content and the resources in Chapter 1. So Vanessa, take it away, please.
Thank you so much, Lupita. So as you can see on the inset in this slide deck, you will see a screenshot of our chapter infographic, which is a companion document to the content contained within Chapter 1. Because we know that your duties as administrators are varied, and oftentimes you only have a small amount of time to perhaps meet with your PLC, with your community of practice, however it is that you're disseminating this information, we've developed these resources that you can take back and apply into your individual sites. So Lupita, if I could have you click on the document, please, so that it can pop it open. So this is the actual infographic, and it's available for you to access electronically. You may also download, save, share out, or print out. If you were to visit our website in our resources section, you're able to break down this document into blocks. So should you be limited to 10 minutes, 15 minutes to share information specific to identifying and classifying English learners that already have an active IEP, or new enrollees who you're having to determine if they are English learners but come in with an active IEP from another state or another country, you would know exactly what steps to follow. Because we like to practice what we preach, we've taken into consideration UDL as we present to adult learners as well. We know that sometimes reading a document can be daunting, especially one as hefty as the California Practitioner's Guide that is 400 pages plus. So having a visual companion to support the information that is contained within, that is digestible visually and also cognitively as we share new learning and perhaps develop and refine already standing learning, this document is developed with that reason, for that reason exactly. So again, first section, identifying and classifying English learners, identification process, classification, assessment, accessibility resources, how to select these. Also language acquisition programs, misclassification, how to address it. And again, we know that a lot of addressing misclassification or issues that require remediation in the future are much better handled before any of that happens. So we're going to be getting into some of that as we address some of the administrator questions. Additionally, we delve in a little bit deeper onto implications and strategies for administrators and teachers. And again, one of the wonderful things that the California Practitioner does is that it includes a student scenario that brings it all together in a way where best practices are highlighted. And you're able to experience that as a case study, a vignette of best practices that deals specifically with the topics that are covered chapter by chapter. Also, if you want to have a quick reference, the frequently asked questions section of the California Practitioner's Guide are also linked directly into this document. One of the things that I forgot to mention is that every single section that you see here highlighted has an active link that when you click on it, it directs you specifically to that page of the California Practitioner's Guide where this area is covered in more detail. So for example, if Lupita were to click on misclassification, which is right there, it would pop it open and it would go straight to the section of the California Practitioner's Guide that deals exactly with that issue. That way it takes away from that extra time of you as administrators having to dig through the document and find the relevant text, resources, and areas that deal specifically with the question that might pop up. And again, all of these are at your fingertips so that you may access them, use them, and share them far and wide, knowing full and well that these are free resources that you can share out, that you can edit, you can modify as they best meet your needs as school site administrators, district level administrators, SELPA administrators, or anybody that serves our students who are dually identified. Thank you, Lupita. I'll hand it back to you.
No, thank you, Vanessa. Folks, we wanted to take this time to be able to walk you through the infographic because we know how tremendously busy you are. And handing the practitioner's guide to you, whether it's in an electronic form or not, absolutely can be very daunting, like Vanessa said. So we want to be able to highlight some of the resources that we've created as companion resources to the practitioner's guide to help facilitate and provide different entry points based on your need, your area of need. Perhaps you recognize a gap in some of your systems or practices, and rather than go page by page, we want to be able to facilitate how to use the practitioner's guide more effectively. So again, we will be giving you some time to become more familiar with our infographics. They are housed on our website, but we have highlighted them in all of our sessions for this Administrator Institute. And everything that we are sharing with you via the slide deck, including the slide deck, can be found on the Padlet. And I think somebody could please drop a link to the Padlet in the chat box as folks are coming in periodically. Okay, fantastic. So moving on. So real quick, the two questions at the bottom of this slide deck: what strategies can I use to reduce misclassification? And how can I implement an appropriate and consistent initial identification process are our guiding questions throughout our presentation today. So keep those in the back of your mind. They will pop up throughout the presentation today to give us some pause and process moments. But again, this is our focus for today. Oops. So chapter 1 focuses primarily on students with an active IEP who may also be classified as English learners. So we're going to walk you through some of the resources within the guide, as well as some companion resources to help us think about, reflect upon our current classification practices, and start thinking about how some of these resources may be utilized to help improve or refine your current processes. So it's important for us to note that once a student is identified as an English learner, we want to make sure that we are clear of what that means. Not only does this student have the EL status, but we also have to identify what proficiency level he or she we find in terms of their initial LPAC data, so that we're able to place them accordingly and be able to provide comprehensive English language instruction. So comprehensive ELD, comprised of both integrated and designated ELD, is a English learner service for all English learners, including English learners with disabilities. We're going to take a deeper dive into comprehensive ELD when we get to chapter 6, but I just want to be able to highlight that as we are working towards refining and our classification processes to identify English learners with an active IEP, we also want to keep in mind that we are, as students are classified, we want to be able to ensure that comprehensive ELD is part of their educational programming. So we're going to start with the student eligibility requirements, and that starts with the home language survey. So moving towards becoming more familiar with what that means and how we can incorporate some best practices in disseminating the home language survey so that we're able to get the information, the accurate information from our families. We want to be able to share some time to talk about and think about what that looks like at your respective sites. So the home language survey is comprised of these 4 questions. The first three questions really focus on the language. Vanessa, you have a question? You have a comment?
Actually, I have a comment, Lupita. I just want to make sure that we drop our note-taking guide so that practitioners, administrators, attendees in general can have a structure to be able to share some of the information, or to just have a mechanism to collect your own reflections as we go through our days. So I don't know, Debbie, Christina, if you have access to the note-taking guide so we can drop it in to make it available to our participants so that you can take any notes if you have access to that.
Thank you, Vanessa. So it's going to get dropped in the chat shortly, and we'll make sure to include it in the Padlet for future reference as well. So the home language survey is the resource that we use to identify what language, if any language other than English, is spoken to the child at home, in the home environment. So as I was saying, the first 3 questions of the home language survey, if they are answered yes, in other words, if a language other than English is spoken to the child, or if the child speaks another language, a language other than English, then that is going to trigger the initial LPAC, right? It's going to trigger the student being guided towards taking the LPAC, in this case, the initial LPAC, or depending on what the student's IEP indicates, perhaps an alternate LPAC. And we'll be talking about that a little bit as well. We also want to take into consideration that perhaps the HLS will determine whether or not the student takes either the initial LPAC or the alternate LPAC. But what I want to talk about here is that if the student, if the HLS indicates that there is no language other than English spoken at home, and we begin to wonder once we meet the child or we interact with the child, there's indication that perhaps the student possibly could be a multilingual learner, then we're going to talk about what are some of the considerations and strategies to think about and to implement to address that. So it's important for us to take into consideration the dynamics of the different home environments of our children. As I alluded to earlier, sometimes parents, how they receive the HLS may have an impact on how accurate the information is when we receive it. So we want to consider, once we receive the information, and if there perhaps is an indication that the student might be a multilingual learner, we want to take into consideration the degrees of language and of English that may be spoken at home. So if the parent indicates that no language other than English is spoken at home, which means English is spoken at home, we want to take into consideration that there may be different degrees of it. So maybe the child is interacting with other siblings that are close to his age, or relatives that may live in the home that speak English. And although parents are speaking a language other than English, they may not be indicating that accurately on the HLS. So it's important for us to take into consideration the home dynamics, the dynamics of language use, and the dynamics of language use that is other than English. And so this merits us having perhaps an interview or conversation with the guardians or parents to help clarify what we're trying to, the information that we're trying to get, to be able to provide the appropriate supports for our students. So here's some important notes to consider. That parents cannot opt out from taking the initial Lpac. So once a student, once the HLS triggers the Lpac, parents can't opt out from taking the Lpac. However, they can request to change the information on the HLS before the initial Lpac is administered or scored. So again, this is really important to help us think about how important it is to access that information to ensure that the HLS information is accurate. And it's going to help us think about, well, how do we disseminate this resource? How do we gather the resource, and how do we make sure that it's accurate before we get to the point where we have to kind of pause and say, okay, wait a minute, we got to backtrack here, and we only have this window of time to be able to make these changes. And then we're, this mad rush of trying to get important information, accurate information to make sure that the student is receiving the services that they need. So again, once either the parent or a certificated staff member, employee of the school site, if there's indication that perhaps the HLS is not accurate, we have 30 days to start making processes to start making those changes before the Lpac is administered to the student. So California's approach to correcting misclassifications, as noted here on this slide, are the following. So if the student is classified as an English learner and there is indication that perhaps the student speaks a language other than English, and the student is unable to perform regular skills and engage in content in English effectively, then that's going to be a kind of a red flag of perhaps we need to take a look at the HLS again and start making these corrections. If the Lpac is administered and the student isn't eligible, the student's classification will remain unchanged regardless of assessment results. So it's important for us to take note of that as well. This is why it's so important to ensure that our processes for gathering this information towards classifying an English learner, classifying a student towards EL status is accurate and effective. So after the administration of the Lpac, but before the student takes a submitted Lpac, we're able to make those changes. So the LEA can collect and review the evidence about the student's English language proficiency. So these are conversations that you want to have with other folks who are working with the student as well as the parents, right? To be able to make these changes effective and in a timely manner. Some promising practices that we want to consider as we are thinking about and perhaps even considering refining our current processes is to think about who is involved in the process and who might need some training. What are some of the resources that they may need to be familiar with? Connecting with the parents and having conversations with them, informal interviews with the parents to get more information about the home dynamics and language use. Perhaps even establish an English learner classification committee that's that's in charge of this process and the tools that are used to gather and take a closer look at this information, as well as make decisions about EL status classification and establish a protocol for how to address when misclassification needs to be changed, when classification needs to be changed. So we're going to pause and process for a little bit now. I think, Vanessa, is this the time for the Jamboard, or you're going to drop it in the chat?
Yeah, so we also have a Jamboard that we want to share with you. And that is, in case we don't get to some of your questions today, we want to provide you with a structure where we can collect your questions and perhaps address them in future sessions, or at least answer them within the structure of the Jamboard so that you can have a reference point as well. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in here as well, here meaning the chat box. So here it is. And if for any reason you are unable to post your questions using either the text box or the sticky, let us know and we'll make arrangements so that that can be usable as soon as possible. Thank you.
So the Jamboard is a way for you to kind of gather your thoughts as we engage in these pause and process opportunities. So in this section, we're going to give you some time to do exactly that. Use the Jamboard as you deem fit to gather your thoughts, jot down some questions or some statements based around the information that we shared with you and these questions. So be thinking about your current enrollment process. How is this process communicated to staff? Who is responsible for the different steps? And what is their responsibility? And then what are the checks and balances that are in place to ensure that there's active and an accurate and effective process for gathering student data, student information? So we're going to give you a couple of minutes. I'm looking at the time. Let's do about 3 minutes, Vanessa. I think that's okay. To be processing these questions. Use the Jamboard as you deem fit. We're going to give you a couple of minutes and then we're going to bring you back and move forward with the second half of this presentation. We're going to make sure that we iron out all the kinks in the resources that we're giving you. In the meantime, please know that these questions, along with the resources that Vanessa has dropped in the chat, the note-taking guide, as well as the Jamboard, will be uploaded onto the Padlet for future use. At this point, it's important for us to really be thinking about these questions, these reflective questions, as you move forward in your respective sites, in your respective roles and positions, and be thinking about your current systems and practices. So I think we're going to move forward so that we have enough time to finish the content in our slide deck. And again, just know that these resources are available to you on the Padlet so that you at some time where you can just kind of sit maybe with a counterpart and start thinking about these questions and drafting some next steps where you have just a little bit more time to be able to do that more effectively. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa, who's going to walk us through the second half of this slide deck to talk about when an IEP is not in place and what do we do as we are discerning how to provide the initial Lpac more effectively. Vanessa?
Thank you, Lupita. So as I'm reading through some of the comments and some of the posts on the Jamboard, it's interesting but not surprising to see that there is a lot of room for some error when we're not really sure as to what the process is when enrolling students, especially as it relates to that home language survey and what it triggers. In this case, we're talking about initial Lpac for students with a known disability and an active IEP. However, we know that students don't always come in with this perfect alignment of circumstances. And sometimes it might be that there is no IEP in place. So what must be done then at this point is to administer the initial Lpac with the appropriate designated supports and universal tools. We're going to get into the next couple of slides to figure out how to do just that. But before we move forward, I know this might be old hat for some of you, but it never hurts to do a quick refresher for those of us that need a little bit more time to familiarize ourselves with what the Lpac assesses. So when we're looking at the Lpac, it is standards-based, right? ELD standards based, and we are assessing 4 domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. When you look at the score reports, whether it be in the initial, but also in the summative, though right now our focus is the initial, we're looking at 2 performance areas. We're looking at oral language and written language. It's important for us to recognize that oral language is speaking specifically to listening and speaking. So as you look at this slide, you see that oral language is illustrated horizontally, listening and speaking. When we're looking at written language, we're looking at reading and writing, the lower half of the structure. So important also for our conversation right now is that we are looking also at receptive and expressive language. So how it is that the student processes through listening, through reading, and how the student expresses, whether it be through speaking and writing. Though we know that there are 4 domains, doesn't necessarily imply that they exist in a vacuum. They are always, always mixed, lingering, one dependent on the other. However, these 4 domains come together and provide us with an overall Lpac score. So again, this is more of an informational piece so that as we move forward, we know exactly what we're talking about when we're referencing 4 domains and the 2 performance areas. Next slide. So because there are 4 specific domains, and the initial point of our conversation right now was, what do we do when a student comes in without an IEP? But we know that as a result of the home language survey and whatever structures are in place at our individual sites, we know that the student must be assessed within that 30-day window. So what we can do is we can select universal tools and designated supports in each of the 4 areas being assessed, the 4 domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Typically, this checklist that you see here, which is also contained in the Padlet, is used when working through an IEP and selecting accessibility resources for a student. However, it is a great resource to use as we discuss and as we determine what appropriate supports might be for a student without an active IEP. So universal tools and designated supports are accessibility resources that are available to all students. I'll say that again. Universal tools and designated supports are available to all students that are going to be assessed with the Lpac. So when you're looking at the 4 domains, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, you can most definitely select universal tools that might be supportive, as well as designated supports that might be supportive for the individual student being assessed in each of the 4 domains. So again, a great structure to use as you are engaging in these discussions. However, one of the questions that Lupita posed earlier in our pause and reflect section was, what is our process? Who is the person that communicates, hey, the student is an English learner, doesn't have an IEP, but still requires some universal tools and designated supports? Who is the person that is going to be making that determination? You might not have that answer right now, but again, a lot of these questions are reflective questions that we want you to consider and take back and perhaps ask around, perhaps look around to what policies and procedures are related to this. Next slide. So when we're talking about these 2 accessibility resources, the U and the Ds, right? The universal tools and the designated supports. Again, as I mentioned, these are available to all students. And those universal tools that are available on the basis of student preference and selection are already included and embedded within the assessment interface. Designated supports are available again to all students, and these are determined appropriate by an educator or a team of educators, always, always, always with student input, parent guardian input as well as appropriate, or that which might be specified in the student's IEP or 504 plan. However, in the situation that we're addressing right now is a student who perhaps does not have an active IEP or a 504 plan. But again, these tools readily available for all students. Next slide. To read a little bit deeper and get a little bit more information as to what these U's and D's, these UDAs look like, the California Assessment Accessibility Resources Matrix does that for you. So it used to be that we had Matrix 1 and Matrix 4, one for the Lpac, one for the SBAC, but now they've come together. So now you have this one document that gives you a thorough description as to what the universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations might look like. In the context of our conversation today, we're looking only at the U's and the D's, universal tools, designated supports, and these can be seen on these placemats included as screenshots also. So these graphics that point out what these accessibility resources are available for you to download and access. So again, always remembering that these are available for all students. No need for a 504, no need for an active IEP to be able to select from these 2 categories of accessibility resources when assessing with the Lpac. Next slide. So very quickly, I went through all of that, but it's still a lot. So I want to make sure that we give you some time to pause and process. Thinking about your existing processes, written or unwritten. How do we know accessibility resources are applied to the initial Lpac administration? Is it by domain? Do we not know? Again, reflective questions, questions that are meant to make us stop and think. How do we know the accessibility resources support the students' identified needs? And how are appropriate domain exemptions considered for the Lpac? And again, this question would come more into focus as we look at the summative Lpac and future applications of our time together as we go through the content of the California Practitioner's Guide. But again, focus on those first two bullets, because just those two in and of themselves are hefty. It's a hefty ask to stop, think, and process, and just identify where some tweaks might be necessary or a full-on overhaul. Give you a minute or so just to consider that. If you have any questions, reflective comments, please share with us in the chat box. And also as a reminder, via the OMS link, we will be sending out more information, also the Padlet as a follow-up email, and a recording of our time together today that will be made available to you via the OMS link that you accessed. We will be emailing it out to you. So going back to students with an IEP, which is the foundation of our topic today, we're looking at an IEP team determination, right? What happens when the IEP team, multidisciplinary team, determines that an alternate assessment is most appropriate? What happens then? What is the process there? What goes on? Well, let's talk a little bit about alternate assessment. Next slide. So again, going back to the accessibility checklist, if you scan down to the page, you'll see a section that calls out specifically the alternate assessment. And you'll see that the very first question included there is, does the student have a significant cognitive disability and an IEP? Yes or no? Additionally, in the goldenrod box, the statement, if yes, the student is eligible to be administered an alternate assessment. If no, reevaluate the use of accessibility resources listed above. Remembering that federal law allows this option only for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities who have an IEP. Super important to remember, which means that, next slide, this determination based on guidance from CDE is that a student who has a specific learning disability rules out from the get-go the consideration of the student having a cognitive impairment and the consideration then of an alternate assessment. Just a quick reminder, I'm sure you all know this, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. Next slide. Another critical point in considering appropriateness of alternate assessment, once you've answered that as a yes or a no, ensuring that the student has the most significant cognitive disability, is important for us to consider communication modes of our student, both expressive and receptive. Receptive being that reading, listening, the expressive being that reading, that writing piece, must be inclusive of knowing our individual students when determining that an alternate is appropriate. Next slide. Because we know that the administration of the alternate Lpac must be with the student's preferred mode of communication. So those individuals that are making these choices, these determinations, have to have an understanding of what these modes of communication might be what they look like, how to interact. It might be necessary that you program some information, that you prepare some buttons, some switches, so that the students have access to a preferred mode of communication. Next slide. And the alternate Lpac makes room for a lot of these considerations to take place and to be explored. So Dr. Montoya and Debbie here at our office developed this fantastic infographic on getting to know the task types that are assessed in the alternate Lpac. So it includes some information of when the alternate will launch, and we know that it already did, and also includes some background information as to who can administer the alternate Lpac, some links that can give you additional information, and also what those task types are and what they might look like. So going from task type 1, recognizing and using common words, to task type 2, communicating about familiar topics, 3, understanding a school exchange, 4, describing a routine, 5, understanding and expressing an opinion, 6, interacting with literary text, and finally 7, interacting with informational text. So this might seem like very broad surface level information, but it prompts a lot of reflection as we're looking at receptive language, expressive language, preferred communication mode, assessor, who's making these determinations. Is the person familiar with the student? What the requirements are in giving the alternate Lpac? Must it be the classroom teacher? All of these questions need to be considered, need to be reflected upon and planned for as we're considering the alternate Lpac and the assessment of our students who have more significant cognitive needs. Next slide. So for our final pause and process prior to our student scenario, we want you to consider the following. What is your enrollment process related to potential EL status? Who handles that? Who answers questions? How is this process communicated to staff and families? Is there a person at the front office that helps with that? Is there a Chromebook set up for families to do that? Is it sent out an email as a link? What do we do about families who might have some language barriers, some literacy barriers? Who is responsible for the different steps in the process? So we're talking about office staff, perhaps your registrar, an ELTOSA, SPED admin, etc. Who's involved in this process? And what are those checks and balances established, identified to ensure an accurate and that an effective process is being implemented? Again, all critical steps that I want to give you a minute, which I know is nowhere near enough time for you to process, but to think about. So I'll go ahead and I'll give you a minute for that so that you can think about that and drop any reflective nuggets into the chat. We love engaging with you and learning from you. So feel free to do that. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to my Wonder Twin so she can take us to the tail end of our time together.
Soon to be triplets. Soon to be triplets. Folks, I'm reading the comments and questions in the chat, and absolutely, I feel a little bit validated in some of the questions and comments that you are asking and responding to, in that it's obvious that you are being very reflective about your current practices, and the need for training is kind of what I see, kind of the common phrases here. Need for training, need for identifying a clear process, need for being able to ensure that we're gathering accurate information in the HLS, and engaging with families and helping them understand what it means to be an English learner, what are the services that are being afforded to them, and how that's comparable to the services that are afforded to them as a student with an active IEP. So all of that information is absolutely critical in ensuring that we have an effective process so that we can afford our students with the appropriate services that they deserve, that they need to be able to make academic and language gains throughout their school life throughout their academic career. So I really appreciate that very much. And please take advantage of the Jamboard to jot down your questions and your thoughts, because that also informs how we proceed with these sessions. We absolutely want to make sure that we design them towards your lens as administrators and be able to give you the appropriate content and resources that are going to help you really maximize the time and the resources that you have to improve systems and services for all of our students. So we just have literally a handful of minutes left. And so we want to be able to give you some time to read through this very short student scenario that kind of puts all of the pieces that we shared with you in this short hour together in place. So we're going to drop it in the chat, as well as know that it's in your Padlet, or you can access it via your device on the screen. Take a couple of minutes. It's very short to read through the student scenario, and you're going to see basically an example of an ideal situation, specifically for an incoming preschooler into a case setting, and some of the things in consideration and tools that are happening in determining the types of services that this kiddo is going to need. So we'll give you just a few minutes to do that. And we'll continue to read through the chat box to make sure that we address any questions that you may have. Oops, somebody's scribbling on our slide. That's quite all right. And feel free to jot down any notes or questions that you may have in the chat or on the Jamboard, or both. While you are perusing through the student scenario, be thinking about some things that are really resonating with you as you read through it, and perhaps some questions that arise through your reading through the student scenario. We just have a couple of minutes left before we close shop, but please know that we can be reached via email. We have our email here that all team members receive when you send us an inquiry or a note. If you don't already, we invite you to follow us on Twitter. We have our Twitter handle on the bottom of the screen. And if you haven't done so already, we invite you to visit our website. We take great pride in organizing and creating resources on our website based on needs in the field. So once you visit our website, let us know what you like. Let us know what you need that you probably might not see on there. And we would be happy to be able to address that as best as we can. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Debbie to see if there are any final thoughts or final words from our fearless and fantastic leader, Dr. Deborah Montoya.
Thank you, Lupita. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We truly appreciate your time, your commitment, and the collective commitment that we bring to this space in accurately and effectively serving English learners and English learners with disabilities. We hope to see you next time during our next session, considerations for all things MTSS, pre-referral and referral. Same time, different date. You have access to all the resources. Know that in between sessions, you're more than welcome to contact us via our website and our email link. Your commitment to us, as well as your questions, is so valuable. Don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of your week. We appreciate you.
Tell a friend.